Hi, welcome to my channel. Thank you for joining today's video. If my voice sounds a little bit different, it's because I'm just getting over COVID, but thank you for joining. Fun fact is right now I cannot smell and I don't really like the smell of this candle, so that's why I'm burning it. I do like the vibes a candle gives, so I'm like, well, if I can't smell, I might as well burn the one that I don't really like right now. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about books that I think made really good audiobooks. I just like to give my brain a distraction, something else to think about. I enjoy listening to audiobooks. Some people like podcasts. I like audiobooks. I feel like since I've listened to so many audiobooks, I have books that I'm like, oh, that was a really well done audiobook. To put it into perspective a little bit with some numbers, last year I read 127 books and 72 of those books were audiobooks. And so that's 57% of the books that I read last year were via audiobook. This year so far, I've read 141 books, and of those 141 books, 95 have been audiobooks, which right now is a 67% audiobook listening rate. I prefer the thriller or romance genre for audiobooks. I'm going to talk about 7 books that I think make really good audiobooks. Like a lot of the books that I think make really good audiobooks are books that have mixed media. So a book that is written and that is also like a podcast in the book. I think those kind of elements make a really good audiobook. Okay, so the first audiobook that I'm going to talk about that I really liked is this book. It's called Sleeping Giants by Sylvia Neuvel, and I'm apologizing if I'm saying the name incorrectly. But this is the first book in a 3-book series called The Themis Files, a science fiction book, but it has like a thriller aspect. Like you're listening to it and you're like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen next. Like there's almost like a little bit of a mystery to solve at the beginning of this book. So the book is written in an interview style primarily. It is one person sitting down and interviewing the main characters of the book, and it has the interview style is like the primary portion. There's some news clippings and I believe journal entries that are sprinkled throughout this book. Oh, and this book does have a full audio cast. I think this was the first book that I've read or listened to that had a full cast, and I really enjoyed that experience. Okay, so this book starts with the interviewer interviewing a woman. Her name is Rose Sullivan, and it kind of starts with going back in time a little bit. And so you meet Rose as an 11-year-old child, and she is riding her bike and she stumbles upon this giant hole in the middle of nowhere. I think they live in New Mexico. It's somewhere in the United States. She is riding her bike, stumbles upon this hole, falls in the hole with the bike, and has to be rescued. But at the bottom of the hole is this giant metal hand, and she was so fascinated by it, so interested in it. And the people who rescued her alerted some authority or somebody, and the hand got removed from the ground, and she thought that was a really fascinating experience. And so that memory kind of stuck with her entire life. And so as she grew up, she took a big interest in science and learning about the world. And so now 17 years later, it's the present time, and she is a physicist that works at the University of Chicago. The interviewer is a person, we find out, that works for the American government. And so over the whole course of the story, he is interviewing these different people who've worked on this project. And Rose is the first one we see that is going to be working on this project. And she, between the time they found the hand and now, which has been 17 years, they found a couple other weird things. They're described as like sheets in the book with a language written on it, but it's not any human language. Rose is given the opportunity to study the hand and the sheets. The American government wants to understand what material the hand's made of, can it do anything? They just want to know everything about it that they can. Oh, and then the government also has an interest in finding other parts. Like, are there other parts of this thing spread throughout the world, basically, not just in America, but throughout the world? And so they want to see what happens if they start combining all these pieces that they found together. So the first part of the book, and I'm talking like the first 5 or 10% of the book, are this team of scientists figuring out ways, first figuring out where the rest of the pieces are, secondly figuring out ways to extract them from the earth, because of course they're not just, sitting on the street of San Francisco. They're like buried in the Indian Ocean somewhere thousands of feet below the surface, and so they have to find all the pieces, put them together, and then explore what happens when they put all these pieces together. And the team of scientists has been taken from people throughout the whole world, so it's not just people and it's not just Americans. The book is really interesting because it just explores politics and like the repercussions of messing with something that you don't actually know what it is, and you know, government just saying no, you're gonna do this and not think about it, and the effect that it has on the citizens. So overall, I felt like it was a really captivating and thought-provoking read, and the audiobook was just really well done with the full cast, and it keeps you interested in it from, you know, the moment the speaker starts. Okay, so the next book that I want to talk about is called The Night Swim by Megan Golden. And this book is the first book in a series, but they're almost kind of like interconnected standalones. It does follow the same main character. Her name's Rachel, but you don't have to read the first book to understand the second. And I think there's only 2 out so far. And I did read books 1 and 2 both through audiobook, and I liked the first book significantly more than the second. This first book was a 5-star read for me. This is a book where you definitely want to read the trigger warnings before listening or reading the book. It does deal with sexual assault quite a bit. Like, that is the core of the book's topic. So definitely check trigger warnings for the book if that's something that you perhaps might be uncomfortable with. This book was another really thought-provoking read. When I first picked this book up from the library to listen to, totally did not think that this would be a 5-star read for me. I thought, oh, it's another thriller, like this should be good, and it was beyond good. It even made me like tear up at the end because the book was so real. Unfortunately, this is another multimedia story where you have the novel as it's written, but it also is a podcast. So there's a podcast within the novel and letters that take place within the novel. And then this is kind of a dual timeline book. If I remember correctly, I did listen to it last year, so the details are just a little fuzzy, but I do know it takes place in the present, but does have some aspects of the book that you go back in time and see what happened in the past. This book follows Rachel Krall. She's the main character, and she is a true crime podcast host. And prior to the events of this book, 2 things happened to her. One, she had a sister who tragically died, and it was ruled as an accidental death, but it never sat quite right with her. And then also before this book, the first season of her podcast took off, and she allowed people to write her letters, people who were in prison and thought that they were innocent. And so she picked a man, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but she picked a man's letter and followed his case, and based off, you know, the evidence he had, as well as the media attention that her podcast triggered, he was actually freed from prison and deemed to be innocent. And so now her podcast is much more popular, and she gets a ton of requests for people that are hoping that their case will be followed, so it will get the same media attention, and hopefully they will get the outcome that they want. So now when this book starts, we're on the 3rd season of her podcast, and this goes back to her hometown. And this is the town that she grew up in. And so in her hometown, there is a high schooler. His name is Scott, and he is a really good swimmer, and he is getting ready. You know, everyone's like, oh, he's gonna be an Olympic swimmer. Everybody loves him, is obsessed with him. He can do no wrong. You know, all this thing, the golden boy. He is accused of sexually assaulting the police chief's granddaughter. And the reason it's important that it's the police chief's granddaughter is because since this man has so much going for him, if it wasn't the police chief's granddaughter, chances are that her accusation never would have even stuck. It never would have even went to trial. But because she is who she is, the police obviously had to take an interest in the case and listen to what she had to say. The podcast aspect of the book, which is actually really cool in the audiobook because it has like music and stuff, and it makes it sound like an actual real podcast, and I thought that was part of why I really enjoyed this as an audiobook. The podcast explores and follows the whole trial. Rachel gets to sit in on the trial, and so the book is written as what she's experiencing in the trial, and then you'll get a chapter that's like her podcast of the trial. And while all of this is going on, she is starting to get letters delivered to her, and letters, you know, aren't that uncommon because she has her podcast. she takes letters from the public, but in this case, the person writing to her says they know something about the death of her sister. So the letters are begging Rachel to look into the case again and to explore what's going on. So we do get some kind of backstory. That's what I meant by the dual timeline. We go back in time a little bit and see what life was like for her and her sister. There is a very minimal romantic subplot. I would say extremely minimal, but it was there, and it does carry over into the second book a little bit. So this was another thought-provoking read. It's hard to say why without giving too much away, but if you listen to the book, you'll understand. I'm sure it's a good book to read too. I just thought it made a good audiobook because mixed media, the book and the podcast, as well as the music and the full, no, I don't want to say full cast, but the three narrators they had did a really good job. And so yeah, it was another thought-provoking read. It explores the trauma of sexual assault, but it does it in a very well done and sensitive way. And nothing in this book is like jaw-dropping just for shock value. Like everything in the book was very realistic, and like I said, I think it was a really well done book and handled a sensitive topic with a lot of care. Okay, so the last book that I'm going to talk about that I think is one of those like well-produced audiobooks, it's another mixed media one, and this book is not for everybody. It's definitely dark. Check trigger warnings. It explores a lot of sensitive topics. This book is called Sadie, and it's by Courtney Summers. It's a young adult novel. I want to say it's a thriller, but I call anything that has like any sort of mystery aspect or anything that like makes me think, oh, what's going to happen next, that's what I refer to as a thriller. I should probably check the definition of what a thriller actually is, but in any event, it gives me thriller vibes, and it's a young adult novel. This book also does have disability rep because Sadie, the main character in the book, has a stutter, and this stutter is discussed in the book, and it kind of explores or how people treat you differently if you have a disability, and how, you know, she's speaking outwardly and she has this stutter, but you get the inside of her head, and the inside of her head is very intelligent, speaks clearly. It's just not always articulated the best way because of her disability, and it looks at how people can think less of you because of that. This is another mixed media book it's another novel and podcast kind of mixed media. There are 2 points of view, and it is a dual narration. The book takes place in a small town. Sadie is a child, and she has a sister, and she lives in poverty. She has kind of deadbeat parents. Her mom, I believe, has addiction issues. I can't remember 100%, but I want to say she does. Sadie is kind of responsible for taking care of her sister because her mom's not stepping up to the plate. So Sadie says, okay, I'm gonna help with my sister. And her sister's name is Maddie, and unfortunately Maddie dies. And Sadie is struggling because nobody seems to care to find out how Maddie died. Nobody seems to care to find out who the killer is, or, you know, bring justice for her sister. So Sadie decides, I'm gonna make it my mission to find out what happened. And then Sadie goes missing. And so we kind of see the book from her point of view. So while everyone understands she's missing, you see what she's doing. She's trying to track down the killer and trying to find out what happened to her sister and bring her sister's killer to justice. While we're following Sadie, the other point of view is from a man named Wes. Wes is a radio show personality or radio show host who was assigned to do a task or a radio episode on small towns in America. While West is researching for his show on small towns in America, he stumbles across Sadie's story. This piqued his interest because when he first got this assignment, he didn't think it would be interesting at all. He was kind of bummed out about it, and his boss was making him do it anyway. But once he finds out that there's this missing girl, he not only is he interested for his show, but he's interested because he's a human and he cares. He goes to the town that she knows she's missing in. He's interviewing people to kind of find out about Sadie and find out what happened to her. And he always seems to be at least one step behind her. And so the whole book is Sadie at the front, looking for her sister, going to all these shady hotels, shady areas, trying to find the man who murdered her sister. And then we have West, who's one step behind her, and his interactions with the people kind of describe what they think about Sadie and what they've thought about that family. And it is a really eye-opening but really sad book. It explores some of the themes. It explores sisterhood. It has a lot of trauma that's dealt with, and it kind of discusses how far people will go for people that they love. And so you will have to read the book to find out what happened to Sadie, and that is the question, what happened to Sadie? And it's a really, really well done audiobook. The next group of books I want to talk about are the honorable mentions, and I think these are books that the narrators might have made them really good audiobooks. I can't quite pinpoint what it is that made them really good, but almost all of these were 5-star reads for me, which is rare for an audiobook because I feel like it takes a little bit more for me to really connect with the character. I just feel that these books made good audiobooks in general, but they're not mixed media. Some of them are dual narration. But yeah, the first book I want to talk about is Mile High by Liz Tomford. This is the first book in her Windy City series. I did listen to the next book in this series and I didn't like it as much as this. It was still good, but this book was like, oh my god, like I was crying. I don't normally cry at audiobooks, and this book made me cry for multiple reasons. Mile High by Liz Tomford. It is a hockey romance, and hockey, you know, it's interesting because I have read some hockey romances where hockey definitely is integrated into the plot, whereas in this book I feel like it could have been any sport. It didn't have to be hockey. So hockey wasn't, it's just the fact that it was a sport. I wouldn't say if you're looking for a hockey romance because you really like hockey, this is not going to be the one for you. But I enjoyed it, and it's kind of a forbidden romance in the sense of it follows two characters, Stevie and Xander, and Stevie is the flight attendant of the hockey team's aircraft, and so she's going to be their flight attendant for the whole season. And it just explores their relationship, basically. The whole book is about their relationship, and I think it was really good. There's mental health representation in this, so I struggle with anxiety. One of the characters has anxiety in this book, and I thought it was really well done, and so I appreciated that. And also, if you like dogs, don't we all love dogs? Dogs play, I won't say a big role in the book, but I think part of the reason I gave it 5 stars was because some of the stuff that happened with the dogs. So yeah, if you like dogs, if you like that like forbidden romance, oh, they shouldn't be together, but they can't keep their hands off each other, it was really good. So I like this one as an audiobook. The next book that I really enjoyed as an audiobook was Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. This is the first book in the, I think it's called the Part of Your World series. I can't remember the name of the series, but the other two are Yours Truly and Just for the Summer, and I know that Yours Truly and Just for the Summer are way more popular than this book. And I'm the type of person that if I know the books are in a series, I want to read them in order. And so I'm like, well, I know Part of Your World like isn't as good as the other two, but I'm going to start with that book. My library had it available, and so I downloaded it. And I loved the book. It was so good. This was another book that made me tear up a little bit, just because when I get so emotionally invested in the characters and really connect with them, I'm gonna get emotional when things happen to them. This book follows Alexis and Daniel. Alexis is an ER doctor, and Daniel owns an Airbnb, well, kind of owns, he runs an Airbnb, I guess I should say, in a small town. And so as the title implies, they're kind of from two different worlds. She's in, you know, the city high life, and he's more like down to earth, country boy type of personality. The people in Alexis's life are extremely judgmental, and while she meets Daniel kind of randomly at the beginning of the book, it's like on this bet. You'll just have to read the book, but it's on a bet. They basically go home together and they get to know each other, and she really likes him, but kind of the whole book is her struggling with how to integrate him into her world. How is she gonna, you know, intertwine and introduce him to her family, because her friends and family are so judgmental. And she's also in the midst of all of this going through a really bad divorce with her husband. So this is another book you might want to check trigger warnings, because they do talk about mental and physical abuse. I really enjoyed the characters. I enjoyed the book overall, and I thought the plot was really cute and had a lot of lighthearted moments, but it also took seriously some of the complex issues that the book touches on, and so I appreciate that and thought it was really well done. So the next book that I thought made a really good audiobook was Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman. And this book is, I think it's considered a dark romance. It definitely has dark stuff going on in it, especially at the beginning. So this is another book where you really want to check trigger warnings. But in this book, we follow two characters. There's Cora and Dean. Cora and Dean know each other from high school, and Cora doesn't like Dean, and Dean is now engaged to her sister. And so Cora goes out for some drinks one night. I think it's at her sister's bachelorette party or some sort of party. And in any event, she ends up alone. She goes to leave, and I think her car breaks down. Something happens where she can't drive home. She might have had too much to drink. And the only person that's available to come pick her up is Dean. And needlessly to say, she's extremely disappointed by this. She hates Dean. She's just doesn't want to deal with him. He comes and picks her up, and they get rear-ended by somebody. And so they get out of the car to figure out what's going on. And unfortunately for them, they get kidnapped by a guy who we learn later is some sort of like serial killer and kidnapper. And so the story starts with that, and it's the plot of them being kidnapped together and explores that relationship. Is of them, you know, they get kidnapped, what they have to go through, and the aftermath of everything. And it explores how they have to deal with their PTSD when they get released. And it also goes back in time a little bit. We get to see some of their, how they grew up together while we discuss some of the reasons that they don't like each other and everything that went on between them when they were younger. That was a really well done audiobook. I really like Jennifer Hartman. I've read one of her other books. It's called Older. So freaking good. That one I read, not an audiobook, but I'm definitely going to read some more books by her. I have 2 more. She just came out with one called Catch the Sun. That's her newest release. And then her other one that I have on my bookshelves I can see right now is June 1st. So I'm going to physically read those 2 books. But yeah, if you like Jennifer Hartman's writing, like if you like her other books, I think that you would really like Still Beating. Now that I've read Still Beating and Older, I kind of understand how she touches on taboo or complex character issues and turns it into a really well done story. So the last book I want to talk about isn't really a book, it's an author. And this is Frida McFadden. Frida McFadden writes some really freaking good thriller books, okay? She is like, her books are like popcorn reads. Like you just want to eat popcorn as you're listening and being like, oh my God, what happens next? And they just are really engaging. They always start out with something like weird happening, and then it like, you know, sets up the story for the characters for the rest of the book. I probably wouldn't want to physically read one of her books. Like the writing style, I think just comes across better as an audiobook than reading. That being said, I haven't actually read one of her books physically, so I could be wrong, but that's just like the vibe that I get. Some of the endings of her books are like, oh my God, I didn't see that coming. And then other times they're like, oh really? Like that was it? The endings of the books are kind of hit and miss, but I would say that the books as a whole are always pretty well done. Like they're always like making you think, and it keeps your brain engaged, and it makes you pay attention and want to know what's going to happen next. So 2 of my favorite books from her, I'll just mention 2, and then really any book by her. I didn't really like The Teacher, I'm going to be honest. That was a newer one she came out with, and that's probably my least favorite book by her. Everything else I've read by her has been pretty good. I think my 2 favorites are Never Lie. That might have been one of the first books I listened to her by her, and that one was really good. And then The Inmate was another one that was really good. Okay, so those are all the books that I wanted to talk about today in this video. I think any one of these books on this list that you pick will be a really good audiobook. But if you've listened to a lot of audiobooks, but not a lot of books that have any of those mixed media or full cast narrators, definitely pick up one of the first ones I mentioned. Those are just special audiobooks in the sense that they're really well done and unique. I would love to be recommended any other audiobooks. I'm always interested in picking up a new book to listen to, something interesting, thought-provoking, anything you guys think is good. I would love to hear about it below in the comments. I do have 2 book social media pages as well as this YouTube channel. I'm on Storygraph as Kindles and Candles, or on Instagram as Kindles and Candles. Also, Storygraph shows all the books that I'm currently reading, and I hope to do some sort of like monthly wrap-up videos. I think I'm gonna do like top 3, bottom 3 videos where I talk about my top favorite and bottom 3 books. Just because I read so many books a month, I don't think people want to hear about all of them, but I could be wrong. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I appreciate you, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!